Hi guys, this is Beatrice. In this video, I will share with you an interesting research article on second language acquisition. As we have learned throughout this course, theories in second language acquisition posit that participating in meaningful interaction is a critical ingredient for the development of L2 speaking skills. Research has also shown the effectiveness of interactive, task-based activities on the development of communicative competence in the L2. The reality is that most of your foreign language students don't really engage in this type of communication outside of the classroom environment. The reality is that we live in a country that is very unique. It is a land that is home to a myriad of languages and cultures, yet each community seems to live in a separate world, where each group knows little about one another. Students take second language courses at the university, yet it is not uncommon for even the seemingly advanced learners to remain reticent about actually using the language. What's more, if these students don't continue to actively engage in communication in the L2, they will lose their communicative competence. Wouldn't it be nice if we as foreign language teachers could enhance the language learning experience of our students by providing a near immersion experience at the university level? But what does it take to encourage learners to willingly engage in meaningful communication outside of the classroom? This is what Jill Pelletieri sought to explore in a pilot study where she investigates whether requiring participation in community-based learning can motivate intermediate-level Spanish learners to engage in more frequent interaction in Spanish outside of the classroom and course requirements. The research article, Measuring Language-Related Outcomes of Community-Based Learning in Intermediate Spanish Courses, was published in Hispania by the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese in 2011. Now, let's look in greater detail the main variable of this study and topics that surround it: willingness to communicate, integrativeness and motivation, and immersion versus foreign language classroom instruction. In the field of research in second language acquisition, willingness to communicate is believed to be one of the most important variables in explaining individual differences with respect to learners' use of their L2 for authentic communication. It is a construct that originated in the field of communications to explain the individual differences in communicative behavior in one's first language. It is conceived as a personality-based predisposition. But in the field of second language acquisition, there are unique variables that influence this construct, such as the range of competence achievable by learners, the variable nature of L2 competence, and other social issues related to L2 use. So willingness to communicate does not simply transfer from the L1 to the L2. In 1998, McIntyre and others offered a theoretical model called the pyramid model. As you can see, willingness to communicate is at the top of the pyramid, a point at which the learner is about to communicate. This is supported by a widening base of situational, affective, and cognitive variables. It is presented as an orientation supported most immediately by the situation-specific influences you see to your left, and by trait-like influences like the ones you see to your right. Second language acquisition research has also found that learners with higher levels of willingness to communicate in the L2 will more frequently engage in L2 for communicative purposes. Some studies have found significant positive correlations between L2 willingness to communicate and integrative motivation, indicating that those who are more integratively motivated to learn the L2 are also more willing to communicate using it. However, these studies took place in an immersion context. So why immersion? In the immersion environment, the student adopts a motivation to learn because it is connected to authentic communication. In the regular classroom environment, however, it may not happen because the learner doesn't make this connection. There are, however, some issues with immersion that may affect willingness to communicate. Research on natural immersion has shown that learners are often anxious about interacting with L2 speakers because they fear that they lack the skills to effectively communicate with them. As long as the learner continues to have positive experiences communicating in the L2 and is surrounded by a positive environment that encourages L2 use, his or her linguistic self-confidence will increase and so the willingness to communicate. Now, this is what Pelletieri wants to find out in her own study. These are the first two research questions. And these are the next two questions. Now let's look at the methodology. The program selected for this study was innovative because it incorporated community-based learning activities into the intermediate Spanish course. This program integrates service learning activities with the Spanish content. It is important to point out that the community-based learning component was mandatory for all students interested in taking intermediate Spanish. They were required to spend at least 16 hours working with and learning from Spanish speakers of different ages who knew very little English. Who were the participants? The participants were 18 non-native Spanish learners who enrolled in the intermediate Spanish program. Prior to enrolling, these students had an average of 4.5 years of language experience, and none of them had previous experience in an immersion program. Now the instrument. A survey was administered at the beginning of the first course and again at the end of the third course. This Likert type skills questionnaire measured the following dimensions. Now let's look at some of the results of this study. Linguistic self-confidence. It is a construct that combines a learner's perceived L2 competence and speaking apprehension. Perceived competence was normally distributed, so a paired samples t-test was used to compare changes in mean scores from fall to spring. This change represents a jump on the ability scale from feeling somewhat able to able. Fall scores for speaking anxiety were not normally distributed, as they were clustered at the lower end, which indicates high levels of anxiety. So a non-parametric test was used, which revealed learners became more comfortable by the end of the program. The next construct, motivation, integrativeness, and willingness to communicate, consisted of the following elements. As you can see, the fall mean motivation score was relatively high. So was the spring motivation score. A non-parametric test was done and indicated that learners' increase in motivation scores from fall to spring was significant. Now looking at the integrativeness scores, for the fall and the spring they were both high, but even then, after the non-parametric test that was conducted, there was a significant growth. To analyze the willingness to communicate inside and outside the classroom, a paired samples t-test and Pearson correlation were used. As you can see, there is an overlap between the two, well over 50%. In the discussion section, Pelletieri expresses that the quantitative analysis supports her hypothesis mentioned in this slide. Then she mentions all the positive outcomes that resulted from this study. Here are 3 of the most important ones. So, we can conclude that the United States has the necessary elements to develop effective second language programs that offer access to a near immersion experience just like the ones offered by traveling abroad. This pilot program seems to be very promising based on the positive outcomes. It would be interesting to conduct a longitudinal study on those participants to monitor their Spanish use outside of college. And this is the end of the presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned from it. The article can be found in this link for more information. Gracias por su atención.